Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I am Muneeb Hamid with the news of this hour. Let's begin with the headlines. Indian troops have martyred 3 more civilians in occupied Kashmir, raising the toll to over a dozen this month. The occupation forces targeted the youths during a cordon and search operation in the Amshipura area of Shopian district. The occupied valley has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 348 days. The Taliban claims they have killed 10 Afghan soldiers in 2 different attacks in northern Kunduz city. In a tweet, spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid said 8 troops were killed in Zakhil, while 2 others in Zakhelo area of Kunduz. Kabul has not commented on the claim yet. In the US, civil rights leader from the 1960s movement John Lewis has died at the age of 80 after a battle with pancreatic cancer. A protege of Martin Luther King Jr., Lewis was elected in 1986 as a Democrat to the US House of Representatives from Georgia. Lewis was a victim of police brutalities and suffered a skull fracture in March 1965's infamous Bloody Sunday. The global number of COVID-19 cases has exceeded 14 million, while the death toll has crossed 600,000. This comes as the US posted another record cases with over 77,000 people testing positive in the past day. The total number of infections in the country has topped 3.6 million, with over 139,000 deaths. In Brazil, 1,163 people have died overnight, increasing the toll to nearly 77,000. Meanwhile, in Pakistan, 47 people lost their lives in the past 24 hours, raising the total to 5,522 with nearly 262,000 cases. China and Russia's foreign ministers have voiced support against US unilateralism and agreed to enhance bilateral cooperation. In a phone call with Russia's Sergei Lavrov, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said Washington is reviving a Cold War mentality in its policy towards Beijing. Lavrov said Moscow opposes unilateralism in international affairs. News in detail after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Now, Indian troops have martyred 3 more civilians in the occupied Kashmir, raising the toll to over a dozen this month. The occupation forces targeted the youths during a cordon and search operation in the Amshipura area of Shopian district. Indian troops have killed 7 Kashmiris within 24 hours, violating human rights in the valley. Earlier, 4 youths were martyred in Kulgam and Kupwara districts. Pakistan has repeatedly urged the international community to take action against Indian brutalities in Kashmir. The occupied valley has been under New Delhi's crushing curfew and communications blackout for the past 348 days. Now, the United Nations has slammed India over its prosecution of Kashmiri journalists, saying it's a pattern of silencing independent reporting on the situation in occupied valley. In a report, UN Special Rapporteur said New Delhi is using criminal sanctions to silence journalists on the brutality of Indian troops in the valley. The report said 4 Kashmiri journalists over the past 5 months have been booked under anti-terror law. The rapporteur said penalization of a journalist solely for being critical of the government is a violation of international human rights law. They said the broad scope of laws under which the journalists have been charged made them easily amenable to abuse. The UN reminded India of its obligations to respect and ensure the right to freedom of expression under international law. Meanwhile, Pakistan Army says Indian troops have wounded 2 women in unprovoked firing along the line of control. In a tweet, the military's media wing said the Indian troops targeted civilians in the Rakchikri and Baro sectors across the LOC. It said Indian troops have committed nearly 1,700 ceasefire violations this year so far. Islamabad has repeatedly asked New Delhi to respect the 2003 ceasefire agreements between the two countries. A fact-finding report has revealed riots against Muslims in India's capital, New Delhi, earlier this year were planned and targeted. 53 people, mostly Muslim, were killed and over 200 wounded in the worst communal violence in the capital for decades. In its report, the Delhi Minorities Commission said there were a number of speeches by ruling party leaders inciting people for violence. It said violence erupted in parts of northeast Delhi after BJP leader Kapil Mishra openly called for forcefully removing anti-citizenship protesters. The report said police had failed to protect the Muslim minority population. The commission said Muslim homes, shops and vehicles were selectively targeted during the rioting. It said 11 mosques, 5 seminaries, a Muslim shrine and a graveyard were attacked and damaged. The commission said police had charged Muslims for the violence, even though they were the first victims. Meanwhile, the Taliban claimed they have killed 10 Afghan soldiers in 2 different attacks in northern Kunduz city. In a tweet, spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid said 8 troops were killed in Zakhel, while 2 others in Zakhelo area of Kunduz. He said a pistol, rocket launcher, 2 rifles and 4 light weapons were also recovered. He accused the Afghan soldiers of targeting and killing civilians. Kabul has not commented on the claim yet. Meanwhile, Afghanistan's Ministry of Defense says it has killed 6 Taliban in the counter-operation in Faizabad district of Jawzjan. The global number of COVID-19 cases has exceeded 14 million, while the death toll has crossed 600,000. This comes as the United States posted another record cases with over 77,000 people testing positive in the past day. The total number of infections in the country has topped 3.6 million, with over 139,000 deaths. In Brazil, 1,163 people died overnight, increasing the toll to nearly 77,000. More details in this report.
The World Health Organization has reported a record single-day increase in global coronavirus cases. The biggest increase are from US, Brazil, India, and South Africa. Despite a spike in cases, US President Donald Trump has ruled out a national mandate requiring people to wear face masks. But California's governor has issued guidance that schools can start in-person instruction if they are off the state's monitoring list for 14 days. He said all schools will require masking, social distancing, and regular testing.
The one thing we have the power to do to get our kids back into school is look at this list again. Wear a mask, physically distance, wash your hands, minimize the mixing. The more we do on this list, and we do it at scale, the quicker all those counties are going to come off that monitoring list. We're going to mitigate the spread of this virus, and those kids are back in school.
Australia has cancelled the next 2-week sitting of the parliament, saying there is a significant risk of virus spread. Azerbaijan has extended lockdown restrictions, including the closure of its borders until August 31st, after a further rise in the number of infections. Authorities in Spain have urged the residents to stay home and not gather in groups of more than 10 as they try to curb a rise in coronavirus cases.
The residents of all these municipalities should stay home if going out is not essential. This is the request we make. Stopping the virus from running out of control depends on all of us. We recommend that you follow this measure and that you do not go to your second homes this weekend.
Doctors at India's largest hospital treating coronavirus patients say they are prepared for a second wave of the virus. China has reported 22 new COVID-19 cases on the mainland, of which 16 are domestically transmitted in the far western region of Xinjiang. Authorities in Xinjiang have reduced subways, buses, and taxis and closed off some residential communities. South Korea's new virus cases have fallen back to 38, but authorities are keeping their guards up as cluster infections continue to put a strain on their efforts to contain the virus.
Meanwhile, Pakistan has reported its record single-day recoveries from COVID-19, with over 14,000 people testing negative. The Health Ministry said over 198,000 people have recovered from the virus so far. The ministry said there are nearly 58,000 active cases in the country, among which 1,604 are critical. It said the death toll in the country has risen overnight by 47 to 5,522. The ministry said nearly 2,000 cases were reported in the last 24 hours, increasing the tally to nearly 262,000. Sindh is the worst hit province with over 111,000 infections, while Punjab has reported over 89,000 cases. Iran has confirmed 183 deaths in a day from COVID-19, bringing the toll to over 13,700. The health ministry said nearly 2,400 people tested positive for the virus, raising the tally to over 269,000. It added over 232,000 people have recovered so far, while more than 3,500 patients remain critical. During a daily news briefing, Health Ministry spokesperson urged people to observe social distancing rules. The Health Ministry said 10 provinces of Iran are still among the high-risk regions. Moving on, in the U.S. civil rights leader from the 1960s movement, John Lewis, has died at the age of 80 after a battle with pancreatic cancer. A protege of Martin Luther King Jr., Lewis was elected in 1986 as a Democrat to the U.S. House of Representatives from Georgia.
During 1961's anti-segregation bus tours called Freedom Rides, racist mobs beat Lewis in South Carolina and Alabama. In an interview in 2004, recalling these acts of the violence, he said none of those incidents made him question the philosophy of nonviolence. Lewis was one of the founders of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee and then served as its chairman from 1963 to 1966. He co-organized and spoke at the 1963 March on Washington, where Martin Luther King Jr. delivered his historic I Have a Dream speech. The Democrat was one of the big six civil rights leaders and the last surviving speaker from the era-defining march. He was a victim of police brutalities and suffered a skull fracture in March 1965's infamous Bloody Sunday. In December 2019, Lewis announced he has been diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Former US President Barack Obama, who awarded Lewis the Medal of Freedom in 2011, paid tribute to the civil rights leader. Obama said Lewis gave all of himself to the cause of freedom and justice and inspired generations to try to live up to his example.
Now, China and Russia's foreign ministers have voiced support against US unilateralism and agreed to enhance bilateral cooperation. In a full call with Russia's Sergei Lavrov, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi said Washington is reviving a Cold War mentality in its policy towards Beijing. Wang said Beijing will not be misled by a small number of anti-China forces in the United States. He said China and Russia should stand by all countries to reject any actions destructive to international order. Meanwhile, Lavrov said Moscow opposes unilateralism in international affairs. He said Washington has always believed in the American exceptionalism and egotism. The remarks come as tensions between the US and China have increased over Beijing's imposition of national security law in Hong Kong. Moving on, US federal agents are cracking down on protesters in Oregon under President Donald Trump's executive order to protect monuments. US Customs and Border Protection spokesperson said agents have been deployed to Portland to support the Department of Homeland Security's unit. Officers shoved away medics trying to help a bleeding protester while several demonstrators were bundled into unmarked vehicles. Oregon Governor Kate Brown called the incident a blatant abuse of power by the federal government, branding it Trump's political theater. Portland's Mayor Ted Wheeler said the Marshal's Service will conduct a full investigation into the alleged use of a weapon. Thousands of Portlanders have been holding daily protests against police brutality outside the federal courthouse since the custodial death of George Floyd. Argentina says it accepts the legitimacy of elections set for the renewal of Venezuela's opposition-led National Assembly. In an interview, President Alberto Fernandez said his administration recognized Venezuela's opposition leader Juan Guaido. The president said Buenos Aires never questioned the legitimacy of Venezuela's elected government. Fernandez also said he will not promote a coup against any president. Earlier, Venezuela's electoral authority said polls to renew the National Assembly will take place on 6th of December. Now, tens of thousands of protesters have flooded the streets of Mali, demanding President Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta to resign. The anti-government movement has asked for the parliament to be dissolved and called for a republican transition from the current government. A delegation from the 15-nation West African regional bloc is trying to calm the political tensions in Mali. The protesters say President Keïta has failed to tackle the dire economy and Mali's 8-year militant conflict. 11 people have died and 158 have been injured in the demonstrations so far that began on 5th of June. The movement has maintained its core demand and rejected all conciliatory gestures from the president. More news coming up after a short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back. The EU has expressed concern over the growing use of sanctions by the US against European companies and interests. In a statement, bloc's Foreign Minister Joseph Borrell said Washington's measures go against international laws. Borrell said he will witness the rise in curbs in cases of Iran, Cuba, the International Criminal Court, and most recently the Nord Stream 2 and Turk Stream projects. He said European policies should be determined in Europe and not by third countries. Borrell said the EU is always open to dialogue, but this cannot take place against the threat of sanctions. Earlier, Germany and Russia rejected US latest threat of sanctions on the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. A fire has engulfed the 15th century cathedral in the western French city of Nantes. This comes just over a year after a major fire at the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris destroyed its main spire. In a statement, local fire services said hundreds of firefighters are battling to put out the blaze. It said they are working to find out the cause of the fire. The cathedral has been damaged earlier as well when in 1972 a fire completely ravaged its roof. Now, EU leaders will meet again today to try to save a post-coronavirus economic rescue plan after running into opposition from the Dutch bloc. The 27th European leaders are negotiating a €750 billion stimulus package that will help lift countries hardest hit by the pandemic. Yesterday, the leaders met one-on-one for the first time since February in an empty European Council building, but they failed to reach an agreement after 12 hours of difficult haggling. Dutch Prime Minister Mark Rutte refused to give ground on his demand for strict controls on payments to his southern parts. Russian pharmaceutical company Pharm has signed a deal to release the Oxford vaccine against the new coronavirus. The agreement will allow Russia to produce the vaccine developed by British-Swedish AstraZeneca and the University of Oxford. Speaking to reporters, Pharm's chairman Alexei Rapik said the company plans to supply the drug to 30 to 50 countries. Russia's investment fund had said Pharm will be one of the core producers of Oxford vaccine in the world.
AstraZeneca signed an agreement on production of Oxford vaccine with one of our portfolio companies, Pharm. So basically, we don't need to take anything from the UK. Everything is given to Pharm by AstraZeneca, and AstraZeneca will be one of the core producers of Oxford vaccine in the world.
Well, following allegations that Russian hackers tried to steal COVID-19 vaccine, country's wealth fund says the deal is evidence of Moscow's clearance. Now, the World Health Organization says it's sending a team of international experts to China to study the origins of COVID-19. It said a two-person WHO advanced team has been in China for a week preparing for the visit of the larger team. At a news briefing, WHO official Mike Ryan said the team will engage with various scientific and health groups in China. Ryan said setting up and deploying a larger team in China will take time.
Our advanced team continues to engage with various scientific and health groups and science and technology groups in China, and we're also reaching out now to experts around the world, trying to build and advance a team that can be proposed to go and carry out a later mission to implement research studies and with colleagues in China.
SpaceX's Crew Dragon Endeavour spacecraft is scheduled to return on 1st of August from the International Space Station. In a statement, NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine said the splashdown is scheduled for 2nd August. Crew Dragon spacecraft with Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken on board successfully docked to the International Space Station on 31st May. Falcon 9 launch vehicle was successfully launched on May 30 from the spaceport at Cape Canaveral, Florida. This launch marks the U.S. first manned flight in 9 years from American soil. Floods and landslides triggered by heavy monsoon rains have killed over 200 people across South Asia over the past month. More details in this report.
More than 1 million people have been marooned in India, Bangladesh and Nepal, while hundreds of thousands have fled their homes. Indian officials said floods and mudslides killed 16 more people in the northeast, raising the death toll in the country to 101. Disaster authority officials said in Assam alone there have been 71 deaths due to the floods, while Nepal has reported at least 117 deaths over the past month and Bangladesh reported 3. Nepalese officials say that at least 47 people were reported missing and 126 have been injured. Last month, rains caused the Brahmaputra River to burst its bank in India's Assam state. This has led to large parts of the state being inundated with water, triggering mudslides and displacing over 3 million people. So far, authorities rescued about 4,000 people trapped in the surging floodwaters in the various parts of Assam. The rains, though crucial for rain-fed crops, often cause extensive damage during the annual monsoon season from June to September.
Meanwhile, in China, 6 people have been killed in landslides caused by torrential rains in southwest Chongqing municipality. Rescue services said heavy downpours in Kaizhou district caused multiple landslides and road collapses. 2 people died and another 4 went missing in the landslides initially. Rescue workers found all bodies later, bringing the death toll to 6. The Ministry of Emergency Management says the floods have affected at least 20 million residents in 24 provincial-level regions across China since the start of July. And now let's have a look at the weather updates across the globe. Well, that's all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus News. Take care.